Sorry for the video artifacts. I'm trying to use a flashlight to show what I did here after not working on R2 for a while due to nasty weather and some other projects. Today I did the first work on him that I've done in quite a while since the last video. And that was this area here where there was a gap between these two pieces where they're glued together. I didn't get enough glue in this top section, and I thought I had filled it with filler and it would be okay, but after I painted it white there was a plain to see vertical line there. So I had melted the plastic together in the back, so I knew the pieces were held together okay, but apparently I didn't get enough glue in the front. So if it flexed at all, it would kind of act like a hinge and open up, just a sliver of space between these two panels, and I didn't want to leave it like that. So it broke my heart here, as from the previous videos, I've finally managed to get a coat of white, not enough to call it done, obviously, and drips and runs that I'm still working on or need to work on. But this area with the gap, I wanted to patch up. So the first thing I did was sand it down to bare plastic in that area. So that's where you can see the gray primer. And then I went down to plastic. So that was the first stage. The second stage, I took my soldering iron and ran it across the two where the two panels join several times to melt the plastic together to make it so it wouldn't act like a hinge and open up, because it would be, the plastic would be pretty much melted together. After I went up and down the slot several times, the gap I noticed was fairly large from the soldering iron tip, so I decided to go ahead and weld plastic in it instead of filling that whole gap with filler. That way the plastic would hopefully bond to the plastic on both sides and make that seam really strong and not have any chance of opening up again. So that's what I did next. And then the final stage that I just finished doing, because I welded some more filament in here, there were areas that were high and low, and I got an X-Acto knife and I scraped as best I could all of the stuff that was too high, so it feels to my touch like I got the majority of it. Might be still just a few areas that are a little bit high, but the goal is to now add some glazing putty in there and use a spreader to spread it out so it's getting closer to filling in that seam so that it's flush with the body and you don't know that there's a seam there. I think it's going to take more sanding. My original sanding was pretty much only far enough that where I could get to the gap, and then once I filled this in and welded it, the welded plastic was past the primer area that I had sanded, so I scraped all that off, and like I said, scraped it trying to get it so it's low rather than high, because it's easier to sand the glazing putty than it is plastic, and when I weld plastic, it's stronger than the original printed PLA, and I guess that's tempering of the plastic, I guess. But so I noticed if I had left it over full and then tried to sand the re-welded filament down level with this, the re-welded filament is more durable than the original stuff, so I would risk sanding away more of the areas that I didn't want to while trying to get the high spots down. So I used an X-Acto knife with kind of a bent end on it to try and scrape everything that was loose and felt like it sat out further than the contours of the body. So now it's just slightly depression area that I'm going to fill with glazing putty, and then hopefully sand that and hopefully get it to the point where it's not noticeable before then painting it. And again, it's like the first week of November, so it's pouring down rain, super high humidity, and in the 40s and 50s. So painting, unless I end up finding a place to paint or putting a table in the garage and get some kind of heater to heat the area in the garage, doesn't look like I'll be doing much, if any, painting before spring happens. But it's been so long since I've made a video, so long since I've even done anything but move R2 from one room to the other. I thought I'd make this video to get something out there to show that I haven't given up. Still working on it. It's just going slower now. Just a little update. R2D2 here. This is the area where there was a crack between two body panels. It wasn't really a crack, it's a gap because plastic didn't split. It's just I didn't get enough glue between the two panels to fill in the gap in between them. So I sanded it down, I melted some plastic in it. And then yesterday I printed this. This is basically a piece of this body panel up here. Actually, it's right there. I took this body panel into Mesh Mixer and just used the plain cut feature to chop off the two sides and the bottom to make it this big. And then my plan is to put sandpaper in here, probably spray adhesive and then glue 220 sandpaper in there, and then use this as a sanding block to get that area to match the body contour. So that's my problem, is now that I made this big ugly mess trying to get it so where you don't see all the area that I've messed up by fixing the thin line. I have a feeling that maybe the thin line would have been less noticeable in the end from what I'm going to end up with, which is part of why I haven't been doing too much work with R2D2, other than the fact that the weather is just absolutely horrible for anything, painting, sanding, or anything. But I am slowly making progress. I'll tack this video onto another small one that I made showing this before I put some of the glazing putty on. But I did put glazing putty on after I welded the seam shut with more PLA. And then I had sanded it smooth, and it just wasn't smooth at all. And just trying to hand sand that curve wasn't working very well for me, so I came up with this idea just to make a sanding block that's the same same radius as the body, and hopefully that'll let me make that area less noticeable and blend in with the area around it. So I'm not sure when I'll get a chance to do the sanding on that. I'll probably tack that onto this video and the other one, because so far it's just a couple short videos. But that's where I'm at with R2D2. I have other projects, so I've moved him into the room with my printers and computers and everything else, and so that's why it's just kind of a mess with R2D2 parts all over the place. I really don't have room for all my projects, so doing my best to come up with creative storage ideas at the moment. Alright, here's another part of this video. I haven't made one for months and months. It is the last day of May. It's only been 2 days in the 70s so far this year. A lot of bad weather. And I admit it, I've been burnt out on R2D2, so knowing that the work I am doing now is all because I didn't paint very well. Haven't been very motivated to work on them. So finally, I think I showed in the prior video, I need to look, I'll probably be stringing multiple videos together that I've made over the past 3 or 4 videos working on this. I took a part of a body file, I can't remember if it was this piece, whatever, but I took a piece of a body file and brought it in a mesh mixer program and chopped just a piece of it out that followed the contour of the body so I could use it as a sanding block. Unfortunately, it didn't have a very smooth curve, so I filled it with glazing putty, and there it sat for months and months until today when I took this outside and I held a piece of 220 grit sandpaper up against this part of the body, which has this nice curve, and I ran the block back and forth against the sandpaper so I had a nice smooth curve that followed the body contour on the inside. Then I sprayed it with spray adhesive, glued on a piece of 220 grit paper, and then today I sanded this area, which is where these 2 panels were glued together and didn't have enough glue, so there was a nice dark black line that you could clearly see against the white paint because these 2 panels weren't together tight enough, and there wasn't enough epoxy in between them, and the primer didn't fill the hole, or the gap rather. So this is probably all gone over in the other videos that I'll be pasting onto this one, but trying to make it short, I melted together the 2 pieces, sanded it down to bare plastic, melted them together with a soldering iron, added some more plastic, and then I added glazing putty to smooth it out. And then today I finally got around to making the sanding block, sanded it. There were a couple low spots that I filled. I used a hobby knife to clean the glazing putty out of these panel lines, and then I also just took a small piece of 220 and fold it over to do a little bit of final sanding in the panel lines. And now that's pretty much done for the filler and sanding, so I think I might have time tonight to try and mask off as much as I can of this and try and just kind of paint primer around where this filler is. And then I'll probably come back with, hopefully I'll be able to pull this 220 grit off of the block. Hopefully that 3M77 spray adhesive will allow me to rip that paper off and put some 400 grit wet dry paper, and then prime the area that's got the red glazing putty, and then go over it with this with 400 grit. And then I'll need to work on the other parts of the body, which of course they're all the way on the other side. Areas like that and that where I had really bad paint drips, and I've done a rough sanding to get rid of the really thick paint drips, but I'll have to go over because it's been months since I've even looked at it to see what the status is, if it's ready for paint. So next step, yeah, I think I'll put some primer over the glazing putty, and then I'll have to sand that, and then I'll check all the areas that are down to gray plastic, or well, that's not plastic, that's primer. And I will spray those areas white, and again with 400 grit wet paper, hopefully be able to blend it in with the rest of the white paint to the point where it's not noticeable. I haven't decided if at that point I should go over the entire thing with another coat of paint, or if that'll be good enough. It kind of depends on how it's gonna look when I'm done with that. But yeah, this is the first work I have done on R2D2 since pretty much since the end of summer 2021, and now it's the end of May 2022. All right, I have sanded the glazing putty till it was smooth, which has extended the white paint loss all the way out to here because I wanted to make sure I got it as smooth as possible. I used X-Acto knife to dig out the pieces of glazing putty that were in the panel lines, and so now this is ready to go over with 400 grit because I can feel height difference in the area where I put the new primer as opposed to this gray, which is the primer that's underneath the white paint. So I will be doing some 400 grit to get that smooth before repainting. And that pretty much finishes up that panel repair. Something I wanted to talk about, I'll try and be brief. I haven't posted a video in 8 months for R2D2. There's two reasons for that. One is the weather. 2021 was a literally record-setting year in our area for several things, like number of days where the temperature was, I think, in the 80s. And I think there were a few times where we set a record for contiguous days without rain. So all spring and summer long, I was able to work on R2. And that brings me to the other reason why it's been 8 months since I posted a video. I am burned out. I realized once I got to the end of the weather and I wanted to reach my goal of getting the white paint on R2D2, and I messed it up by having tons of drips. You can see all these primer areas. There were big drips there. I still need to go over and double check everything because it's been sitting for quite a while. And also some of the panel lines. I sanded the drips off of the surface, but some of the panel lines filled up a bit too much with paint, so I'll be probably trying to correct that where I see it. But I realized once I messed up the paint, I was really depressed about it. And then also later in the winter, I realized that nearly every spare hour I had, I spent on R2D2. I didn't spend that much time with my friends. The yard work, because there was so much sun, so little rain, that the grass turned brown and didn't grow, and not much was going on in the rest of the yard, so I didn't have to do that much yard work. Well, 2022 so far is the opposite of 2021. Here it is, the middle of June where I'm filming this, and we have had records in the opposite direction. I think we've only had about 3 days that have reached into the 70s. It's rain pretty much every week. I don't mind the rain, but it's been the humidity and the rain and the cold temperatures still in the 50s to 60s, that I haven't even been tempted to go out and work on R2D2, just due to, again, being dissatisfied with where I ended up after last year, realizing how much more time I still have to go on this, and the fact that I spent, all of my free time working on this thing is combined with the weather this year has just made me just kind of lose focus on this project and go back to my arcade machine hobby where I can do that indoors. Still stuff I need to do outdoors for that, but most of it's just can be done indoors. Whereas I can't really sand or paint indoors in cold temperatures. So I haven't been bombarded with messages. In fact, I don't think I've had any messages in my videos saying, yo, dude, what's going on? You haven't posted a video in a while. So this might not be necessary to talk about, but I thought I would because I am kind of documenting the process, and part of the process for me has been that I spent way too much time focused on this last year, and it kind of burned me out. I've read comments from several other people that printing everything all at once and then having a huge pile of printed parts that all need to be finished is not a good idea, and I'd 100% agree with that. I spent about 3 months with 2 printers to get everything printed, and now I've just got huge piles, plastic bins filled with parts that need to be sanded and primed and glazing putty and primered and sanded again, repeat over and over and over again before I even get to electronics or even getting him on his legs. So just something to watch out for. I am slowly working on it, as this video shows. Even though it's taken me 8 months, I think I finally have the seam that I was really unhappy with pretty much fixed, apart from the final sanding and repaint. I'm hoping that the repaint, I can just maybe kind of repaint over the areas that are primer to get them white, and then 400 grit everything, and it'll kind of blend in. I'm hoping I don't have to repaint the entire body again, because that's going to possibly introduce more runs, starting this process over again. I'm also needing to go back to my videos and remember where I was at, because I know there were a couple things I needed to remember. Some of them might have been the electronics that I bought for these that might require me to pop these panels out after I've glued them in already. I seem to remember there possibly being an issue with that. But I'm trying to make this a bit short because I'm stacking up like 3 different videos filmed in October and November of 2021, and another one filmed a couple months ago, and then this one all in one video. So I'll stop there and just say I'm still here. I'm still working on R2D2. It's just going very slowly at the moment.